Squirrel and John Muir. Hutchings' house was plain as a barn and sat in an isolated valley that lay like carpet at the foot of the mountains. It was operated by James Hutchings, his wife Elvira, and her mother, Mrs. Sproat. The Hutchings children were Floy, her little sister Cozy, and her baby brother, William. Floy was the first white child born in Yosemite Valley. She tore around it like a squirrel, so that was what they called her. Papa said Yosemite Valley was the most beautiful place on earth. Floy had never been anywhere else. Floy filled the hours by talking to the family's pet parrot, balancing on a plank by the woodpile, making mud pies, and capturing frogs. Papa wrote magazine articles that made people want to come and see the spectacular scenery for themselves. They made the difficult journey on horseback to stay in the hotel and go on Papa's guided tours. Floy would barge up to the tourists and say, "Why did you come? Do snakes scare you? They don't scare me. If you get bit, I'll save you. What about bears?" Then she growled at them. "What an odd little child," they would mutter. Papa let Floy go on his tours, but once, when the group was too pokey to suit her, she left them to follow a deer track and wasn't found until after dark. "I can't mind you and a business at the same time," Papa said. "You'll have to stay home from now on." Another time, the boys at the stable dared her to ride an unbroken horse. "Where have you been, you wild thing?" Granny Sproat cried when she came in. "Clean yourself off before the guests see you." At night, Papa read Shakespeare aloud to the guests. Afterward, Floy watched them undress. A lady heard her snickering and complained, "Mr. Hutchinson, that girl of yours is a little savage." Papa decided that customers needed more privacy, such as would be provided by walls between their rooms. He bought a water-powered sawmill, but he couldn't run it and make the hotel improvements by himself. One day, a man sauntered up to the hotel, as if the fates had sent him. "I'm John Muir," he said. "I'm looking for work." "He's just the man," Papa cried after they had talked. "He's a sawyer, a carpenter, and an inventor." Floyd dangled a lizard in front of the man. Tourist ladies usually squealed. "Hello, little go-quick," Muir said to the lizard. To Floy, he said, "I think he wants to be free just as we do." Floy stared at him. She put the lizard on the ground. "Don't pester the man," Papa said. Papa and John Muir set up the sawmill and cut boards. John Muir built himself a small cabin, slinging his bed from the ceiling and letting a stream run right along his dirt floor. John Muir worked hard, but he took time to wander through the valley. One day, Floy followed him along the river. He waded into the current and stretched out on a rock. After a few minutes, Floy couldn't keep quiet. "What are you doing?" she called. "I'm finding out how it feels to be a river rock," he said. "Rocks don't feel," she said. "Maybe they do. We don't know how to ask them," he said. Floy asked, "Are you crazy?" John Muir laughed. Granny Sproat knew how to predict the weather. When she said it was going to snow, John Muir went dashing outside as if the house had caught fire. "Where are you going?" Floy called. "To listen for the sound of snowflakes landing," he said. "I don't hear anything," Floy said. "You're not quiet yet," Muir replied, bounding off. When spring came and flowers bloomed in the meadows, Floy heard John Muir teasing them. "Now how come you're here, sweet blue-eyed darling?" he asked one. "Didn't I see you miles away last year?" He filled his pockets, his shirt front, and his handkerchief with blossoms, leaves, twigs, and pebbles. On a sultry afternoon, a thunderstorm blew in and made little Cozy cry. "Don't be frightened," John Muir said soothingly. "Storms are nature's glory." He pulled on his jacket. "Are you going out?" Floy asked. "I want to hear the trees singing in the wind," he said. Floyd watched him from the house as he shinnied up a tall tree and swayed back and forth like a bobolink on a reed. "That man acts like an overgrown schoolboy," Papa said. When he had the day off, John Muir went climbing. Floyd watched him skip up sheer rock faces until he was out of sight. Hours later, he came flying back down, arms and legs churning. "What do you do up there?" she asked him. "I look," he said. "Well, that's not anything," said Floyd. John Muir fell to his knees. "Look here," he said. "It's just some old ants," Floyd answered. "Now look again," he said, handing her his little magnifying glass. Floyd gasped. A huge ant was crushing a leaf in its jaws. "Here's another trail to follow," Muir said. "I don't see it," said Floyd. "Grasshopper," Muir said. "Now, where is he?" "There!" cried Floyd, seeing it hop. Floyd was captivated. She used the magnifying glass to examine a bug clinging to the underside of a leaf and a dewdrop that seemed to hold the whole world. John Muir told her the names of animals, birds, and plants and how he listened for what they had to say. "You've learned to see what's small and near," he said. "Now we're ready to take in the mountains." Floyd raised her eyes. "They're staring at us," she said. "They're talking to us," Muir said. Muir believed the mountains and valleys had been formed by glaciers millions of years ago. When he climbed them, he rose from ledge to ledge as if lifted by the clouds he called sky messengers. "I'm looking for signs of that glacier ice," he said. "They will prove that I'm right." One day, John Muir took Floyd on a walk that followed some bear tracks. He told her he had found a lookout on the north wall. "I call it Sunnyside Bench," he said. "I sat looking long enough and eventually I saw. There are glacier trails, rocks and domes, all polished by ice from one end of the valley to the other. They show us how Yosemite Valley was formed." "Will you take me to Sunnyside Bench?" Floyd asked. "Someday," Muir said, "when you're ready." John Muir spent his evenings with the family, working on an article explaining his glacier theory. Then he mailed it to a New York newspaper. "Maybe they'll publish it," he said. Papa complained. "I don't pay him to hatch crazy ideas. Scientists say there were never any glaciers here. They're calling Muir ignorant." But pretty soon, some scientists were saying Muir was right about how Yosemite Valley was formed by glaciers. A batch of tourists shored up, waving newspaper clippings, and asked for the famous guy, John Muir. The ladies in the group simpered and gushed. Muir was so handsome, so poetic, his theory so fascinating. Floyd thought they were silly. She expected John Muir to say he was too busy to guide them. "Well, they are silly," he said, but he just couldn't help talking about Yosemite Valley. He loved it so much. So Floyd went with him. He explained about the glaciers and asked Floyd to name the plants and animals. "When we were trying to pick out anything in nature," he told the visitors, "we find it hitched to everything else in the universe." Two ladies contrived to faint. Others whined about bee stings, torn clothes, and sore bottoms. But when they got home, they spread the word about the gentle genius of the Sierras. The more people came and asked for John Muir to be their guide instead of James Hutchings, the more Papa stewed. Finally, he couldn't stand it anymore. "Muir, you're my hired hand," he yelled. "Either that's your purpose here or you leave." Muir nodded. "Then I'll be on my way," he said. Floyd took off after him. "I won't let you go," she cried. "There's work I must do in the world," he said. Floyd saw that he meant it. She screamed, "I hate you," and ran off. Muir chased after her. "Come, Squirrel, follow me." He held out his hand. "I'll show you Sunnyside Bench. It will be yours now." Floyd wiped her eyes. "Everything changes, Floyd. That's nature's first law." On the way up, he sang Highland Mary and called out, "Squirrel, are you there?" every little while. She called back, "Yes," and heard her answer trail away. The valley lay below. It was the world as far as Floy was concerned. Beyond, in the mist, was all the rest, where John Muir had come from and was going back to. "Now you know the way," John Muir said. "This is where you'll have your best thoughts, I expect." They sat for a long time. The sun sank to the horizon and they scampered down over the rocks, as sure-footed as a pair of mountain goats.